Welcome to the Depot Sports Chat. I'm Drew Rubenstein here with Justin Jackson to wrap up the WVU men's basketball team season. A lot's happened since the Mountaineers lost to Georgetown in the first round of the NIT. And we'll start off with Aaron Harris announcing that he was transferring and wants to go closer to home. He's from Indianapolis, Indiana. But let's start right there. Are you buying that this decision was made because Aaron wants to get closer to home, or do you think more may be at play here?
Well, I think when you look at Harris's situation, you kind of go back to where, when he was first coming out of high school in 2012, a lot of those schools, like Purdue, Indiana, from the area, Notre Dame, didn't offer Aaron. And that was kind of a chip on his shoulder that he had talked about a few times when he was here at WVU. Evansville was a smaller school from that area that had offered him. He obviously chose West Virginia over Evansville, but I think there is Aaron's a pretty outright guy and has never really falsified anything before. So if he says he wants to go closer to home, I believe that's probably the case. He's talked during the season about his strong tie with his family and with his father especially, and with his brothers and sisters, I would say he probably wants to go back home. And I think there would probably be, since he's played so well his first two seasons at West Virginia. In fact, I saw one blog from the Indianapolis Star that talked about there would be some interest now from some of those schools in Harris, maybe like a Purdue, or I don't know if Indiana would get involved or not. But I think from some reports I've seen, Matt Painter has been in touch with Coach Huggins about Harris, and those two coaches are close friends anyway. So there's obviously some connections there, and probably you'll see Harris's name pop up somewhere closer to home when it's all said and done.
Sure, and I think there's something there, and it's probably a case where just because he wants to go closer home, I mean, there could be a variety of factors, and I guess that's what we're kind of left wondering at this point, because all of that said, it's not common, while transfers are common within college basketball, not a lot of times do you see a guy who's a starter averaging close to 18 points per game, one of the main offensive threats for a team, deciding to leave after his sophomore season. So I guess part of it, and the bigger scale, bigger picture, something that you've touched on a few times this week is the number of transfers, and it just adds to that growing list where I guess in the context of that conversation, you have to wonder if there is more at play with Aaron Harris and what's going on when you've seen so many transfers in recent years.
Well, I mean, that's kind of what makes the Harris story or the Harris transfer interesting. It's not necessarily that he was one of the leading scorers and the best three-point shooter and took a lot of shots, and you can say, maybe he wasn't happy and he's leaving. And what makes it interesting is that he adds his name to a growing list now of a wide array of transfers from WVU since Huggins took over in 2007 up until last year's recruiting class. He assigned 28 kids, and only 11 of those 28 went on to use their college eligibility at WVU or are still on the team. Not counting this year's freshman class, because they haven't, they would factor into that equation after next year if they were to stick around. But it's like 61% of his players don't stick around that he's recruited since he's been at West Virginia, which kind of what adds intrigue to the Harris story. Is he just another guy trying to get away from West Virginia, or is it truly he just wanted to go closer to home and he just happens to add his name to a long list? But I mean, there's been some other transfer. I mean, Dalton Pepper, if you remember him, played the best game of his life in the NCAA tournament, had 3 steals and won West Virginia that game against Clemson, and then a couple weeks later he was transferred. So I mean, there have been instances where guys have played pretty well and just decided West Virginia wasn't the place for them anymore for one reason or another. And Aaron certainly adds his name to that list, and it's a growing list, absolutely.
So for WVU fans, how alarming is that, or how alarming should that be? Because the piece of the conversation is this isn't just a WVU thing; it is across the country. But WVU's numbers are higher than the national trend here.
Yeah, the national average says 40% of freshmen will transfer before their junior year, and West Virginia is like at 54% right now, and that's not including some of the guys that had signed and couldn't get in academically, or a guy like Devin Ebanks who went pro after a sophomore year. So I mean, those guys are excluded from that equation, and it's still at 54%. It's alarming. It is a trend. Guys transfer in college basketball. There is a free agent system in college basketball. I mean, that is no longer a secret. West Virginia's numbers are higher than the national trend, so I mean that is a little alarming. How do you fix it? I don't know. I mean, we could be here for an hour, talking about this.
That's true. And when you look at it, what Bob Huggins has said over the last several years is that some of the issues for a WVU team that has now missed the NCAA tournament in back-to-back years is that he hasn't had guys that have always known what they're doing within the system.
Right.
He's not always just questioned effort. It's been guys making simple mistakes on defense, not doing what they're supposed to do, and it would seem like this plays right into that.
Right.
Next season's obviously an important one. Not only are you adding two new faces in Jonathan Holton and Elijah Macon, but there's still some more questions about what this roster could look like. Jawan Staten is still deciding whether or not to go pro. So when you factor in all of these questions that still kind of are hovering over the WVU basketball team, it kind of makes the offseason cloudy and very important, you would think, for Bob Huggins and his program.
Yeah, and that's kind of been the MO for the team the last couple of off seasons. There's always been kind of a wait and see on who's going to leave next or who's going to be next on the list to go, and and that's probably not the best way that you want to enter an off season, but unfortunately it's kind of happening again this year with Aaron leaving, and then obviously to kind of talk about Jawan a little bit. I mean, obviously you can't really fault Jawan for wanting to go pro if that's what he chooses. I mean, he will graduate in May with his degree in public relations, so I mean it's not really a question about getting an education because he'll have his degree, and it's a matter of whether or not he feels he can make a run at the NBA or even maybe play overseas or in the NBA D League, as opposed to coming back for another year at WVU. It would ultimately be up to him, and I don't know if there's really a right or wrong answer for him at this moment. When you kind of look at what he would be coming back to West Virginia, as opposed to how hard it would be to play at the next level, it's kind of a hard question to ask, or a hard question to come up with an answer for either way for him at this moment. But he'll make that decision. April 27th is the drop dead deadline for him to make that decision, so it'll be here in a couple weeks. And as far as other guys leaving, it's possible they could go. Some other guys could go. But when you keep having that turnover, and getting back to what you were saying, when you keep replacing new guys with bringing in more new guys, and you have to kind of go through the introduction process again, and you're always young, and that's kind of what Coach Huggins has had to go through the last couple of seasons, and possible that it could be again next year too. I mean, as of right now, the roster is still sort of stable, but if some other things happen, that they could be kind of in a rebuilding process again next year.
And because Staten's obviously the big one, wait to see what happens there. But then I guess the other unknown that WVU fans kind of wonder, and it seems like is going to play a big impact the next season, is what can we really expect from Jonathan Holton and Elijah Macon? Yeah. Bob Huggins hasn't really been shy and saying that these two guys should bring a lot to the table. Yeah. That said, neither one has played a season in Bob Huggins' system. What are the realistic expectations for these guys?
I had a chance. I watched Elijah play like 2 or 3 times in high school, so I kind of have a first-hand knowledge of what he could bring, and he certainly has size, and he does have some low-post scoring ability. Likes to play with his back to the basket, and he's a man. He's every bit of 6'9" and probably 240, 250. I mean, so he's another good banger, someone who can help rebound points in the paint, which are some deficiencies that West Virginia had to go through this year because Devin Williams was their only guy that they could kind of count on, and he was a freshman and just kind of getting used to it. So now they have another guy they can add to that area that can give a little bit of support. Jonathan Holton, I've never seen play. I've outside of a scrimmage at the beginning of the season. From everything I've been told, he's a guy who can slash to the basket, likes to rebound. His stats in college show that he is a pretty good rebounder, so he has some athletic ability, and he's also a pretty good three-point shooter. His last year at the junior college, he shot like 38% from three, so he gives you a little bit of inside-outside. So they haven't played in a while. I mean, Elijah wasn't allowed to practice this past season, so he hasn't really practiced since his last year of high school. And Jonathan was able to practice this season with the team, but he hasn't played a college game since 2012. So it's kind of tough to say that they'll come in and they're just going to jump right in and be the players that everyone kind of thinks they're going to be. It's certainly going to take some time next year for them to get the rust off and get into the flow of things.
Sure. Last one, just looking bigger picture, this isn't to take away from what Bob Huggins has done over the course of his career and even at WVU, obviously getting the Mountaineers to the Final Four, but it's been 2 seasons and some would say 3 where you know they've taken steps back and season ticket sales have diminished over the last 2 years. How important is this next season? I mean, is it fair to at least ask questions about where is the direction of this program and where do you look at it on the bigger picture here?
You know, yeah, I mean, obviously it's a big season, but I mean, if you talk to Coach about it, you know, every season is big, and that's kind of how he'll approach it, and he'll go into the season with the same amount of importance that he's gone into every season, and you know, he has a chance to win next year. I mean, just kind of looking at the Big 12 next year. A lot of guys are going to be leaving for the draft. Kansas is going to lose Embiid and Wiggins to the draft. Oklahoma State's going to lose Marcus Smart to the draft. I mean, a lot of, and then, you know, you had some good seniors, and so some teams are going to be in some rebuilding positions next year. So West Virginia may be a little bit better off positioning-wise in the Big 12 than maybe what they were their first 2 seasons. So that might help. It also depends on what you do in your non-conference season. If you can win some games there early and kind of get some momentum built, and then if you can get Holton and Macon into the mix and get them playing better, and if Henderson's shooting the ball well and Williams is playing better in the post, and if Staten does come back, I mean, those are a lot of ifs.
Right.
Yeah, and that's kind of what you go into this off season is how many of those ifs can you get answered positively, and that's just going to be time to tell. But I think if you go into the season with a lot of those ifs answered positively, you got a chance to make a move in the Big 12. And then obviously, if you can play well in the Big 12, you can do pretty well, maybe even get into the tournament.
It'll be interesting to see. Justin, appreciate your time once again, and please continue to check thedpost.com for the latest on the Mountaineers. Thanks for watching again.